Myrish Firewine worthy of list?
Please.
Welcome back to the Great Hall of Winterfell, and to my guide on the wine recipes of the known world in A Song of Ice and Fire. While this is technically a part 2 to my House of the Dragon wine video, it does stand by itself, although you may enjoy the deeper dive into the wines themselves in part 1, as well as an overview of the beers and ciders released for the show. For a quick summary that pertains to today's video, Vintage Wine Estates and Seven Kingdoms Cellars have released 4 wines for the House of the Dragon: a Chardonnay, a Pinot Noir, a Cabernet Sauvignon, and a red blend. I spoke on their branding tactics, lamenting their choice not to label the wines with names that corresponded to some in-universe counterparts, such as Arbor Gold or Dornish Red. There exist ways to do so in a manner that would still keep the label's approval by the TTB, and it would have been a cool way to further distinguish the wines for Game of Thrones fans. As luck would have it, though, there exists not one, but 2 cookbooks adapting recipes from the Song of Ice and Fire series, both written by Chelsea Monroe-Cassel. If that name sounds familiar, Chelsea also wrote the Elder Scrolls Cookbook, which I have covered extensively on this channel, as well as many other fandom recipe books from popular franchises including Star Wars, World of Warcraft, and Star Trek. The first cookbook is called A Feast of Ice and Fire, and also credits Chelsea's co-blogger Sarian Lehrer from their website The Inn at the Crossroads. First published in 2012 in the earliest days of Game of Thrones popularity, it features a litany of recipes and even includes excerpts from the books that correspond to the dishes to be prepared, which is a feature I absolutely appreciate. You may not have noticed, but I do the same at the top of all of the descriptions of my videos on fictional recipes, which admittedly is now the majority of the content on this channel and what I prefer to make. The second cookbook, released earlier this year in May of 2024, is fittingly titled The Official Game of Thrones Cookbook, and further expands the collection of recipes from A Song of Ice and Fire. While it drops the inclusion of book excerpts at the beginning of each recipe, it adds an additional layer of immersion instead. The whole cookbook is positioned as if Chelsea is adapting a manuscript from Westeros itself. From her section of the foreword, titled A Note on Modernization. When I was asked by my publisher if I would undertake the modernization of an unusual manuscript found moldering among the stacks of Old Town, I jumped at the opportunity. This mysterious folio represented a chance to dig into a unique culinary treasure, a record of a time and place we can only imagine. Through considerable effort and laborious testing, I have fine-tuned these recipes to make them more accessible for modern readers, although I have been careful to maintain the voice of the original author, Maester Alton, including his accounts of each recipe's origin and relevant footnotes. Where helpful, I have added my own notes to aid readers with access to a modern kitchen and included suggested pairings to accompany the dishes. I really appreciate this kind of immersion applied to accompanying materials for fictional franchises, and attempt to do so in an admittedly tongue-in-cheek way through my use of costumes and green screens on this channel. To further the immersion, the introduction is written by Maester Alton himself, although it is rather lengthy and I don't want to spoil it for you. Maybe some other time. The 2 cookbooks are both extremely well written and thankfully don't really overlap, but rather complement each other nicely. Returning to the beverages themselves, we left the previous video having assigned the closest book counterparts to the 4 House of the Dragon wines and the best recipe from either cookbook for each. Arbor Gold for the California Chardonnay, which will be used in our Myrish Firewine recipe. Arbor Red for the California Cabernet Sauvignon, which will be our Southron mulled wine. Dornish Red for the Oregon Pinot Noir, which will become our medieval mulled wine. And the private stock of Runsford red wine, Lord of the Arbor, for the Lodi Red blend, which will become our Hippocras. Let's just kick things off with that one. From the official Game of Thrones cookbook. According to Maester Gildane's Fire and Blood, Hippocras may have arrived in Westeros along with the Targaryens. However, the original concept, one of spices steeped in sweetened wine, is likely considerably older. Indeed, several fragments of medical texts from Essos include instructions for making similar beverages, which were prized for their ability to balance the humors. Given the expensive spice profile of the ingredients, these so-called remedies would have been accessible only to to the wealthy, even in Essos where such spices are more readily available. Even if originally intended only as a medicinal cordial, Hippocras has since grown in popularity as a digestive following a rich meal or a nightcap before bed. I have found that it imparts a feeling of well-being that radiates from the center of the chest outwards. The flavor is quite sweet, with a sharp bite of spices at the fore and a more mellow, pleasant burn that lingers on the tongue. A small glass of fortified Hippocras is generally sufficient to warm the bones, although there are some who have been known to quaff it. Such indulgence is ill-advised and invariably leads to the mightiest of headaches the following morning. This Hippocras makes 750 milliliters of product, takes about 30 minutes of prep, and 1 to 3 days to infuse, and pairs well with rich red meat and cherry tarts. To craft a Hippocras worthy of High Garden, you'll want to procure 1 750 milliliter bottle of red wine, such as Bordeaux, a half cup of sugar or more to taste, 2 teaspoons of ground ginger, 1 teaspoon of whole cloves, half a teaspoon of caraway seed, half a teaspoon of dried galangal, half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, half a teaspoon of ground grains of paradise, half a teaspoon of ground long pepper, and 3 cinnamon sticks. Combine all the ingredients in a medium pot over medium heat. Heat the wine until it is steaming and the sugar has dissolved, then remove from the heat. Let the wine sit on the spices at room temperature for at least 24 hours or up to 3 days, then taste and adjust sweetness as desired. Strain the wine several times through fine mesh until it runs clear, then pour into a clean bottle. Cap and store somewhere dark for up to 2 weeks or several months if fortified as below. For a more robust version, this recipe can be fortified with the addition of 1 cup of brandy and served in small glasses. If it wasn't obvious from the footage, I have taken the liberty of splitting the recipe in 2 and fortifying half of it with a half cup of brandy so we can compare them. Let's taste these. We'll start with the non-fortified one. And I'm not going crazy on full glasses because I have a lot of things to taste here. Add a little to our tiny little taster here of our fortified stuff. Kicking things off with the non-fortified Hippocras. Oh, that smells nice. A lot of cinnamon, and I had never heard of galangal before this, and if I'm butchering that pronunciation, apologies.
Galangal.
It was kind of like a more citrusy ginger based off of how I was picking it up while I was grinding it. That's a sweet and complex spicy brew. Wow. The sweetness is, immediately what your tongue picks up. As it progresses, the spice really kicks in the back of your throat, and then that's sort of what you're left with on the finish before it dials back into the wine itself. It was quite the choice on our part to go with the heaviest wine for this one, but I dig it. That's tasty. It's not exactly a summery drink by any means, and so I'm worried a little bit about our heavier one there, but yeah, that's pretty crazy. The long pepper is also coming through. I love long pepper. If you missed it, I used it in my Dragon's Breath mead video, adapting it from the quest in Skyrim, and used long pepper in that recipe, and that was the first time I had ever tried it after tasting history brought it to my attention. It's just got such a complex, fruity pepperiness, and also is spicier than black peppercorns. I'm definitely getting a lot of that here. Totally worth it for the long pepper alone, in my opinion. Let's give the fortified version a shot. Oh, yep, that's brandy on the nose. I may prefer the fortified version because it cuts back on the sweetness. So if you really like sweet stuff, then obviously it's not going to be for you, but I really, really, really like that. You have more room to pick up on more of the richer spice, like the cinnamon and ginger, and a little bit of that earthy carawayness and funky grains of paradise. I'm happy with this. This is that finish is just like a hint of vanilla there. This is nice. I'm surprised. I thought that was not going to be my favorite, and I was going to prefer the unfortified version, but turns out the unfortified one I think could use some fortification. I think that the sugar could use a little bit of tamping down, which I maybe wouldn't have noticed until trying it fortified, but awesome. I dig it. Now that we've tasted the Hippocras made with the House of the Dragon Lodi Red blend, let's work our way down to the mulled wines from A Feast of Ice and Fire. It is actually a full section of mulled wines because it includes two from A Clash of Kings. The old bear was particular about his hot spiced wine. So much cinnamon and so much nutmeg and so much honey, not a drop more. Raisins and nuts and dried berries, but no lemon. That was the rankest sort of Southron heresy. The first mulled wine recipe of this book is called Medieval Mulled Wine, and according to the cookbook, produces a hearty mulled wine rich in spices. It is heavy and strong, without the sweetness of many modern mulled wines. To accommodate the old bear's preferences, we added raisins, cranberries, and almonds to the 14th century recipe, creating the ideal drink for those who plan to walk the wall at night. They then include a helpful snippet from a collection of recipes dating back to the 14th century known as Le Viandier de Taillevent, which details a real-world Hippocras recipe. Hippocras: take 4 ounces of very fine cinnamon, 2 ounces of fine cassia flowers, an ounce of selected Mecca ginger, an ounce of grains of paradise, and 1/6 of an ounce of nutmeg and galangal combined.
Galangal.
Crush them all together, take a good ½ ounce of this powder and 8 ounces of sugar, which thus makes sweet powder, and mix it with a quart of wine. Before we get into the wine itself, let's talk about poudre douce. Poudre douce, or sweet powder, was a common medieval spice mix. Equally useful for flavoring savory main courses and sweet desserts, it was also used to season mulled wine or Hippocras. We've replaced the cassia flowers with extra cinnamon, although if ground cassia is available, 2 teaspoons may be used in place of half of the regular cinnamon. The recipe for poudre douce calls for 4½ teaspoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1 teaspoon of grains of paradise, a pinch of nutmeg, a pinch of galangal, and 1 cup of sugar. Combine all the ingredients and store in a small airtight jar. Now that we have that, back to the wine. This medieval mulled wine serves 4, takes 5 minutes of prep and at least 20 minutes of cook time, and pairs well with beef and bacon pie, oryx roasted with leeks, and medieval honey biscuits. To mull a wine worthy of the Night's Watch, you'll need 1 bottle of inexpensive red wine. Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, and Pinot Noir are all suggested choices, but we'll be using our bottle of House of the Dragon Pinot Noir, although the heartier Cab Sauv would have also been right at home here. 1½ tablespoons of poudre douce, and a handful each of dried cranberries, raisins, and almonds. Bring the wine to a simmer. Stir in spice, nuts, and dried fruits, and continue to simmer for at least 20 minutes, stirring occasionally. After sitting, the spice mixture will create a thick residue that will settle to the bottom. Using a ladle, serve into individual mugs or other heat-safe vessels. Try not to disturb the layer of spices at the bottom of the pot. And here it is, the medieval mulled wine. I wondered why their poudre douce recipe excluded the cassia flowers stated in the 14th century recipe. They do explain in that section of the cookbook, in lieu of cassia flowers, they just upped the cinnamon. Cassia apparently is a member of the cinnamon family, and if you're getting cheap cinnamon, a lot of the times it is cassia cinnamon instead of Ceylon cinnamon or Saigon cinnamon. So, the more you know. Also, apparently cassia flowers themselves have a bit of a laxative property, so my bowels may thank them for the exclusion. Right away on the nose, that is very almond starchy. So the old bear likes his nutty wine, I guess. There's maybe a hint of raisin and cranberry, but not a whole lot. I'm getting a lot of almond on this, so maybe slicing the almonds wasn't the right choice, and I should have just chucked them in whole. It is tart, probably part of that being the fault of the Pinot Noir, because that's a tartar red wine. While I did feel a little bit conflicted about putting a wine that I classified as a Dornish red as my medieval mulled wine for the wall, at the same time, they can't grow grapes in the north, so they're obviously importing it from somewhere. Why not from Dorne? And it would also make sense if the old bear did not like lemon in his mulled wines if he was importing something that tart, because adding lemon then to it would just put that way over the top and you'd just be giving yourself a little bit of a tummy ache, all things considered. So I guess it makes sense. Moving south, the second mulled wine recipe from A Feast of Ice and Fire takes the old bear's accusation that the use of lemon in a mulled wine is
the rankest sort of Southron heresy
to heart in a Southron mulled wine. From the cookbook, this recipe comes from the chaplain's wife at a top British university. It produces a delicious hot wine that, while spicy and rich, is medium-bodied and easy to drink. The sweetness of the honey and cane sugar combines brilliantly with the spice of the fresh ginger, resulting in an arresting tingle that floods the palate without compromising the other flavors. This Southron mulled wine serves 10, takes 10 minutes of prep and 45 minutes of cook time, and pairs well with poached pears, rack of lamb, and Aria's snitched tarts. To mull a wine worthy of any Southron noble, you'll need 2 clementines or 1 small orange, 20 whole cloves, 2 bottles of red wine. Shiraz and Cabernet are stated to work well, but we'll be making use of our House of the Dragon Cabernet Sauvignon, although I did need to pick up a second bottle, for obvious reasons. 3 cups pulp-free orange juice, 1 tablespoon of ground cinnamon, 2 cinnamon sticks, 1 tablespoon of ground nutmeg, 3 1-inch cubes fresh ginger, 3 tablespoons honey, 4 heaping tablespoons sugar, 1/4 cup fresh lemon juice, 1 shot brandy, cognac, or Armagnac, optional but adds a pleasant kick. Slice the clementines in half and stud each half with the whole cloves, inserting the stem of the clove into the rind and leaving the buds protruding. You may need to pierce the flesh of the clementines with a small knife in order to insert the cloves. Float the clementines in the wine, rind down, so that the cloves are suspended in the wine. Add all the remaining ingredients and bring the mixture to a simmer, stirring often with a whisk, but do not boil. Simmer for 5 minutes, then reduce the heat so that the wine is kept just below a simmer. Heat for 45 minutes, then serve with a ladle. Cook's note: don't be afraid to meddle with the proportions to suit your taste, adjusting the amounts of honey, ginger, and fruit juice as desired. Additional sugar or honey can also be added to make the wine more drinkable for those who are not enduring freezing temperatures. The clementines make delicious boozy treats for the lucky guests still around when the wine runs out. And here it is, our Southron mulled wine. It is quite citrusy on the nose. I did not fortify this one yet, although I find it interesting that the Hippocras recipe said to add a full cup of brandy to it to fortify it, whereas this just says add a shot of brandy, cognac, or Armagnac. But I don't know if they mean add a shot to your individual drink, because they don't say where to put it in the instructions. So then I guess my brain would say add it when they add the ingredients. And logically, if it's a shot, you would think you would do that at the time of serving, whereas if it was going to be for a bigger batch, you'd choose a larger amount. But I don't know. Instructions unclear. I did not fortify it. But we could do that here right now. First I'll taste it without adding any, and then I'll add just a little drop of it to see what it would be like if we had added it to the whole batch, and then we'll add a little bit more as if it were a shot in a whole glass. Yeah, that's tart, citrusy, juicy, rich spices. Man, those cloves and clementines just bring to mind Christmas. It reminds me of the Nord mead that we made on this channel, which also used orange zest and cloves and ginger. And so that was like a mead version of this, that you also, drink at room temperature instead of warm. It's good. It's definitely almost like a holiday punch, or rather just a holiday mulled wine, because it doesn't have you strain any of the stuff out. I got a nice layer of spices up on the top that's like when a clump of it hits you in the mouth, it gets powdery quick. And I did mix it very well before you come at me. I whisked that bad boy. Let's try fortifying it. Members and patrons of this channel will know why I have this particular cognac, because it will feature in some upcoming stuff this year. It's in some members exclusive stuff, so if you are privy to getting some members exclusive hints at future content, consider joining the channel here or on Patreon, whichever floats your boat. But if not, no worries. I'm still gonna put out these videos. It's just a great way to support me. Tiny little drop. We'll give her a swirl, see what that does. It maybe smooths it out a little bit, but it doesn't give it as much oomph as I get on the Hippocras with its larger amount of cognac added. So let's just add a little more and see what that does. Maybe I just like cognac, because this is nice. It cuts back on the acidity. It's not quite so in your face, not so tart, rounds it out. Perhaps, yes, does make it a little boozier, but I like that flavor. That's nice. I also very much appreciate the use of actual ginger in that versus just sticking to the powdered stuff. I Dig it. Now that we've made both of the mulled wines from A Feast of Ice and Fire, let's return to the official Game of Thrones cookbook for some Myrish Firewine. The prized ingredient in this wine is mastic, an unassuming little dollop of hardened resin that is highly valued for its flavor and medicinal qualities. The trees that produce this precious sap grow only on the isles surrounding Lys.
Lys, they call it.
And the harvesting process is laborious. The trees are scored until they weep, and the drops of hardened resin are carefully collected from a bed of powdered clay into which they drip. After carefully aging in dark warehouses, the tears, as these drops of resin are called, are sorted according to size and purity. They can be ground with salt or sugar for easier inclusion in a variety of recipes, and are even used in some cosmetic preparations in Lys. It is worth noting that while there is no culinary relation between this resin and the so-called tears of Lys, their similarity in name may shed some light on the production of that infamous poison. But that is an undertaking for a different maester than I. The wine has a color ranging from light golden to a darker amber. The flavor is round with a thick honey sweetness that's followed by the slow burn of pepper on the tip of the tongue. The bite of mastic cuts through what could otherwise only be called cloying, while the anise flavor itself is more subtle, imparting a warming nature to the wine through its aroma and taste. Nonetheless, I advise cutting the mixture with a little water to taste, as is the custom in Lys. In other cities where the wine is imported, it is sometimes fortified with brandy or other strong spirits for long sea voyages, or added to juice or other wine as a flavoring. A less popular variant pairs this recipe with a red wine and cinnamon sticks, although this is so reminiscent of our own mulled wine as to seem lackluster. This recipe makes 750 milliliters, takes 5 minutes of prep and 20 minutes of cook time, and pairs well with Dragonstone Jarhila and roast goose sauced with mulberries. To make a Myrish Firewine worthy of Lys, you'll need 1 750 milliliter bottle white wine, 1 cup of honey, 1 medjool date, pitted and diced, 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper, half a teaspoon of finely ground mastic gum, a pinch of finely ground saffron, and 2 bay leaves. Combine 1 cup of the wine with the honey in a small saucepan and bring to a boil. Once the honey has dissolved, reduce the heat to a simmer and add the remaining ingredients. I am going to pause here and tell you to not do what I just did, because it says to add the remaining ingredients, so I assumed that meant add the rest of the white wine, not reading a couple sentences ahead like a dork. If I had, I would have known to save the rest of the wine and let the simmering wine and honey chew on those other ingredients for 10 minutes, but I added my wine here because it said add the remaining ingredients. As we'll see in a second, it says let the mixture simmer for about 10 minutes, then remove it from the heat and allow it to sit for another 10 minutes. Then add the remaining wine, then pour everything through a fine sieve into a clean bottle. You may need to strain the liquid more than once to achieve a clear appearance. To serve, mix to taste with water, either hot or cold, in a ratio of about 1 to 1. So, yeah, I kind of botched this one a little bit. If anything, I think it's gonna be fine. Once I realized my mistake, move it off of the heat and then let it sit for a really long time while I prepped the other ones and made the other ones. So it did have time to chew on everything at a lower temperature, but I think that the higher temps probably would have helped. So I'm gonna blame that on any issues, but if you are looking to make this, don't make my mistake. And do not add the rest of your wine until after you've added the other ingredients and simmered them for 10 minutes. We'll see how it goes. I've got it here. As you may have seen in the footage there, the added volume of stuff does mean that we end up with more than a full bottle's worth of stuff. So what I'm gonna do is measure this into cups to try both hot and cold and see what we prefer. For our proportions here, I'm gonna do a 1/4 cup of hot water first, and then a 1/4 cup of our Myrish Firewine. And I'm gonna just crouch down here to do this. There's not really a better way. So. All right, half and half with the hot water. Give her a little swirl. Ooh. All right, I like the black pepper coming through. Get just a hint of that saffron, which to me, saffron's a weird ingredient. It always, to me, smells kind of like pool chemicals. So I know it's one of the most expensive and fancy spices out there, but it does have quite the medicinal smell to me. But the bay leaves round it out, give it a general smoothness on the nose, herbaceous even. That is pleasant. The sweetness and spice work very nicely together. Sugar and spice and everything nice, who knew? Ooh. And then the more I have of it, the more that pepperiness comes through. The mastic was an ingredient that I wasn't sure about, but that was interesting. I do want to try it now. Cold. 1/4 cup. And then my cold water. All right, let's see how this is. Ooh, it tamps down the sweetness on the nose and some of the rounder bay leaf, and it gives you all the spice. I'm picking up on the pepper and saffron 10 times more here. You know, oddly though, on both of these, I haven't gotten a lot of the date. Well, I like that cold. That's nice. That would probably be good with carbonated water, or carbonated with the drink mate. Hashtag not sponsored, but hit me up. Yeah, I like that a lot. And as you can see, I don't have time to sit there and run things through the same filter multiple times. So I just put 2 strainers on top of each other on a funnel to do this kind of stuff, just to catch as much as I can, you know, putting the coarser strainer on top and then the finer one underneath, but nobody has time to filter back and forth. So this is good enough. Because this was the bottom of it, there were some more pepper solids coming through and some of that saffron. That could also be why we're picking up on them more on this glass as opposed to the other, but I like it. I like it a lot. This wine itself was 13.5% alcohol, assuming that it only lost, we'll say 3.5%. You could have a full glass of this, you know, if it's, you know, cut half and half. You could have a full 12-ounce cup, essentially, and it would be like a refreshing little brew. I like it. I'm not gonna do it for this video, but I'll let you know how it goes, and maybe we'll do it on stream sometime, but I'll add some bubbly water to this while I watch House of the Dragon tonight, and I'll let you know how it goes. But that is a treat. Myrish Firewine, man. I like this. That's nice. Now, before we wrap up, there is one additional recipe from the 2 cookbooks, namely honey sweetened wine in A Feast of Ice and Fire. It calls for a semi-sweet white wine or rosé, which doesn't quite fit the bill of any of the House of the Dragon wines. As such, I've selected 2 wines for us to try this recipe 2 ways. First, a Chateau Saint Michel Riesling that fits the semi-sweet white designation at 3 grams of sugar per 5-ounce glass. I also wanted to try to incorporate a rosé just for fun. It was a little more difficult to find one that hit that semi-sweet spot. There are a lot of dry rosés right now and sweet ones, but that middle territory is tricky. However, because we're sweetening it with honey anyways, I'm okay with something a little drier as long as there's still some sugar around. Luckily, I already had a bottle that fit the bill, a 2020 vintage Mason No. 9 by Post Malone. This rosé has a sugar content of around 2 grams per glass, so it's a tiny bit drier, but you'll hear no complaints from me. In the infamous words of Austin Post, rosés for when you want to get a little fancy. Back to the cookbook. And to quote A Storm of Swords, Dany broke her fast under the persimmon tree that grew in the terrace garden. Missandei served her duck eggs and dog sausage, and half a cup of sweetened wine mixed with the juice of a lime. The honey drew flies, but a scented candle drove them off. From the cookbook itself, this beverage is a variation on ancient Roman mulsum and is very refreshing and drinkable on a warm summer morning. It makes 3 servings, takes 5 minutes of prep, chills for 2 hours or overnight, and pairs well with breakfast in marine and duck with lemons. To make a refreshing honey-sweetened wine worthy of brunch in Essos, you'll need 12 ounces of semi-sweet wine, white or rosé, about 2 tablespoons of honey, and 3 lime wedges. In a glass or pitcher, mix the wine and honey. The ratio is roughly 1 tablespoon honey per glass of wine, but add the honey slowly and sweeten to your taste. Squeeze the juice from 1 or 2 of the lime wedges into the mixture and stir until everything has been incorporated. This beverage can be made ahead of time and chilled. To serve, pour it into 3 decorative glasses. These glasses aren't decorative enough. We're switching it up. And garnish with the lime. And here they are, the last 2 drinks of our tasting, the honey-sweetened wines, in both rosé and white wine forms. I'll tell you which one I like more. Up first, the white wine with the Chateau Saint Michel Riesling. Oh, it smells so refreshing, like the best limeade you've ever had. That's just tasty. It's sweet, tart, and refreshing. Now over to Postie's Rosé. Oh, now that's nice. Because the wine wasn't quite as sweet, it actually makes for a better experience, in my opinion. So if your taste buds are anything like mine, maybe ignore what they're saying about using a semi-sweet. So, in hindsight, we probably could have gotten away with our House of the Dragon Chardonnay being used in it, but oh well, maybe I'll pick up another bottle or two, but those ones are the hardest ones to find of the House of the Dragon wine collection. There's not a whole lot to say about these, because this was by far the simplest recipe to create out of any of them. This one's an easy one to whip up if you're in a pinch and need to make something for your House of the Dragon finale watch party this week. An easy win. While those other ones are more complex and fun, those are very warming, and thus for cooler weather. Even the fire wine is still a little bit on the more warming side unless you go with the cold water option. So I like these. I'm gonna add my lime wedges just to see how that goes. Oh, it's even better with the lime wedges in the glass. Awesome. And there you have it, the wine recipes of A Song of Ice and Fire. I think it was fitting to use our House of the Dragon wines in these recipes, although I did particularly enjoy that Mason No. 9 honey sweetened wine as well. Despite my initial frustrations in the previous video that the bottles were not named after the actual wines found in the books and shows, there actually is an Arbor Gold and Dornish Red on the way through a third Game of Thrones cookbook that comes out this October, and I've gotten a glimpse at the table of contents, which have recipes for these famed wines in them, as well as a great many other beverages from Westeros. What that means is you should probably subscribe so you don't miss those recipes when I make them. I'll probably cover at least a bit of the cookbook when it comes out, but may save some recipes for the next few seasons of House of the Dragon. In the meantime, if you're new to the channel, I hope you've enjoyed this two-part series and that you'll check out some of the Elder Scrolls and Fallout videos I've got on the channel, if you haven't already. We'll also be traveling to Middle-earth and Midgard later this summer. Also, before we wrap things up entirely, I do need to once again shout out Patrick from Lone Wolf Interactive, who graciously lent us this Unreal Engine version of the Great Hall of Winterfell for use in this video. So thank you again, Patrick. You're a legend. Go check out Lone Wolf Interactive up there. Of course, once again, you can also support this growing channel by joining with a membership or over on Patreon, like the noble benefactor IKnewThatWasADog. Tap here for part 1, and once again, to quote everyone's favorite Lannister, I drink and I know things.